You chose this, my mother said, like my divorce was a hobby I picked up to stay busy. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't even look guilty. She just slid my receipt folder back across the kitchen island with 2 fingers, like it was something sticky. Then, without changing her expression, she turned and asked my younger brother if he wanted red leather or black for his new truck. Same kitchen. Same granite counters. Same mother. Different child. 11 years later, I stood in the back of a candlelit banquet hall watching my mother lift a champagne glass and tell a room full of people how proud she was of the sacrifices she made for her family. Her eyes swept the tables, landed on me, and she blinked once, like she'd just noticed a stain. Then the man beside her leaned toward the microphone, looked straight at my mother, and said one sentence that turned the whole room quiet enough to hear someone's fork hit the floor. What he said didn't just ruin her night. It cracked open an 11-year lie she'd been feeding everyone, including herself. Before I go on, take a second to like and subscribe if this story hits you in a place you recognize. And drop your location and local time in the comments. I always want to know where people are listening from when they hear something like this. My name is Erin Callahan. I'm 41 years old, and this is not a revenge story. It's a you don't get to rewrite me anymore story. Now let me take you back 11 years, to the day I asked my mother for help and learned exactly what kind of love she was willing to give me. I grew up in a split-level house on Sablewood Drive in Overland Park, Kansas, the kind of neighborhood with trimmed hedges and HOA emails that read like passive-aggressive poetry. From the outside, we looked normal. Inside, my mother ran the house the way some people run a business. Clean. Efficient. Ranked. She didn't say she had favorites. She didn't have to. You felt it in the way she introduced us. This is Ben, she'd say, bright voice, hand on his shoulder like a proud coach. He's got a good head on him. Then she'd glance at me like she'd almost forgotten I was standing there. And this is Erin. Just my name. No extra sentence. No cine. My dad had left when I was 12. One suitcase, one argument, and then the soft hush of his absence settling into the corners of the house like dust. After that, my mother became something harder. Not cruel in the movie villain way. Cruel in the way a person can be when they believe they're being practical. She had rules. Ben could make mistakes because he was still figuring himself out. I couldn't because I was too smart for that. Ben got boys will be boys. I got you should have known better. By high school, I learned to earn love by being easy. No drama. No needs. No mess. Which is probably why I married the first man who made me feel chosen. His name was Kyle Maddox. We met at a friend's backyard barbecue when I was 25. He had soft hands, a clean laugh, and a way of looking at me like he couldn't believe I was real. I thought that kind of attention meant safety. It wasn't. Kyle wasn't the kind of man who hit you. He was the kind who made you doubt your own reality and then acted wounded when you reacted. He'd forget to pay bills and tell me I must have misunderstood. He'd flirt right in front of me and call me paranoid when I looked hurt. He'd disappear for hours and come home smiling like I was supposed to be grateful he returned. For a while, I kept trying to be the wife I thought I needed to be to deserve peace. And then one night, I found a second phone in the glove box of his car. Not hidden well, like he wanted me to find it eventually. There were texts on it. Not just flirty. Not just miss you. There were plans. Hotel names. Times. A woman saving his number as babe work. I sat in the driver's seat for 9 minutes with my hands on the steering wheel, staring at the screen until my eyes went dry. When I went inside, Kyle was sitting on the couch watching TV, like the world was fine. I said, "Who is she?" He didn't even pretend to be confused. He just sighed, like I'd asked him to take out the trash. And then he said, "Erin, you've been a lot lately." That's when I realized it wasn't the cheating that would destroy me. It was the way he could betray me and still make it sound like my fault. The divorce didn't come with a dramatic screaming match. It came with paperwork, lawyer invoices, filing fees, and the slow humiliation of learning that freedom has a price tag. I'd saved some money, but Kyle had been quietly draining our accounts for months. Business stuff, he'd said. Trust me, By the time I sat in my attorney's office, cheap coffee, beige carpet, the sound of a printer spitting out my life, I had two choices: stay married and keep disappearing inside myself, or leave and pay for it in dollars I didn't have. The first invoice was $3,800. The second was $2,100. Then there were court costs, mediation, and a retainer my lawyer said gently, like he hated the words as much as I did. If you can't pay this, we'll have to pause.
Pause.
As if my life was a subscription service. That's when I did what I'd sworn I'd never do. I went to my mother. It was a Tuesday in early April. Gray sky. Cold wind. The kind of day that makes you feel like the world is holding its breath. I brought my folder, everything clipped, labeled, organized, like I could make this less embarrassing by being neat. My mother was at the kitchen island, sorting mail into piles with military precision. Ben's car was in the driveway. He was still living at home, temporarily, at 27. My mother looked up when I walked in and said, "Is Kyle coming too?" I said, "No."
She didn't ask why.
She just nodded, like she'd already decided what kind of story this was going to be. I sat at the bar stool and slid the folder toward her. "I need help," I said. My voice sounded wrong in my own ears, thin, like a radio station with bad signal. She opened the folder, flipped through the invoices, the court dates, the lawyer letter. Her face stayed calm.
Too calm.
"How much?" she asked. $7,000, I said. "I'm working extra shifts, but I can't keep up with the deadlines." My mother closed the folder. Not hard, just final. "Erin," she said, "you chose to marry him." Waiting for the rest. The part where she softened. The part where she said, "You're my daughter.
I've got you."
Instead, she continued, voice steady, almost bored. "You chose to leave. So you chose the consequences." My throat tightened. "I didn't choose to be lied to," I said. My mother tilted her head, like she was considering a different angle on a math problem. "People don't get divorced for no reason," she said. "You must have ignored signs." I felt heat crawl up my neck. "I'm not asking you to fix my marriage," I said. "I'm asking you to help me get out of it safely." She tapped the folder once, like it was a menu she didn't like. "And then what?" she asked. "You'll come back here? With drama? With baggage?" That word, baggage, landed like she'd set something heavy on my chest. "I'm your daughter," I said. She looked at me for a long second, and I swear to you I saw the calculation happening behind her eyes. Then she said it.
Soft.
Precise. "You were always the one who could handle things." Across the kitchen, Ben opened the fridge and pulled out a soda.
He didn't look at me.
He didn't say, "Mom, that's messed up." He didn't say anything at all. My mother stood up, walked to the drawer by the microwave, and pulled out her checkbook like she was about to prove me wrong. My heart lifted for half a second. Then she wrote something down, tore out the check, and held it up. Not to me. To Ben.
"Here," she said.
"This should cover the down payment. And don't let the dealership talk you into that ridiculous extended warranty." Ben took it with a grin. "Thanks, Mom." I sat there watching the ink dry on a check that wasn't for me. My mother turned back to the folder and pushed it toward me again. "You'll figure it out," she said. "You always do." I felt my eyes sting. Not because I was going to cry in front of her. Because my body was realizing something my mind didn't want to accept. She wasn't going to save me. Not because she couldn't. Because she didn't want to. I stood up slowly, gathered the folder, and forced my voice to stay even. "Okay," I said. My mother looked relieved, like my calm tone meant she'd won. As I turned to leave, she added, almost kindly, "Just don't make this messy, Erin. Don't turn it into a whole thing." I paused at the doorway, and I said, "It's already a whole thing. I just won't be performing it for you anymore." She frowned like she didn't understand the language I was speaking. Then I walked out. That night, I sat in my apartment, half-packed boxes, a mattress on the floor, the hum of my fridge louder than it should have been, and I did the math. Over and over. Like if I stared long enough, The numbers would get embarrassed and change. They didn't. I had $612 in my checking account. I had a court deadline in 6 days. And I had a mother who just told me my pain was a choice. At 2:11 a.m., I opened my contacts, scrolled to Mom, and held my thumb over the call button for 8 seconds. Then I hit edit. And I changed her name to Do Not Ask Again. Not out of spite. Out of survival. Because asking her for help had cost me something bigger than money. It had cost me the last illusion I still had about being loved without earning it. By morning I had a plan. Not a good one. Not a comfortable one. But a plan. And it started with one thing I hadn't done my whole life. I stopped expecting the people who hurt me to also be the ones who healed me. The morning after I changed my mother's name to Do Not Ask Again, I woke up before my alarm. 4:52 a.m. Not because I was rested. Because anxiety has a way of yanking you awake before your life can collapse without supervision. My apartment was quiet except for the hum of the fridge and the faint tick of the cheap wall clock I'd bought from Target when Kyle and I first moved in. Back when I thought shared furniture meant shared loyalty. I sat on the edge of the mattress, still on the floor, and opened my banking app. $612.43. Court retainer due in 6 days.
Rent due in 12.
Electric bill already past due. For a few seconds, I just stared at the numbers. Then I did something that would have horrified the version of me my mother preferred, the quiet, agreeable one who never made things complicated. I stopped waiting for rescue. That same morning, I called my lawyer and said, "If I pick up extra work and pay in installments, will you keep the case active?"
He paused.
Long enough that I thought he might say no. Then he said, "Most people don't ask that question. They just disappear." "I don't have the luxury of disappearing," I replied. Another pause. "All right," he said finally. "We'll work something out." It wasn't kindness. It was professionalism. But at that moment it felt like oxygen. I worked at a physical therapy clinic on the south side of town. Front desk. Insurance intake. Scheduling. Smiling at people who were in pain while pretending my own life wasn't quietly on fire. That week, I picked up every extra shift they had. Mornings at the desk. Evenings filing insurance claims. Weekends answering overflow calls from home. By day 3, my voice hurt from talking. By day 5, my hands shook when I poured coffee. On Thursday afternoon, my supervisor, Melissa, leaned against my desk and said, "You've been clocking 14-hour days. Everything okay?" I gave her the version of the truth that didn't invite questions. "Divorce," I said. Her face softened immediately. "Oh, honey," she whispered. "That'll do it." She didn't ask for details. She just handed me a list. 3 clinics in our network need temp billing help. Remote.
Nights.
It's boring as sin, but it pays weekly. I took the list like it was a life raft. "Thank you," I said. She shrugged. Everyone needs a soft place to land sometimes. I didn't tell her that my soft place had just handed my brother a truck down payment while telling me to be resilient. The first time Kyle's lawyer emailed me, it was 9:13 p.m. Subject line: Property clarification. I opened it sitting cross-legged on my mattress, laptop balanced on a cardboard box that doubled as my nightstand. He was contesting the division of assets. Assets. We didn't have assets. We had a joint couch, a used sedan, and a credit card balance that looked like a cry for help. But Kyle had suddenly decided the car was primarily used by him. Which was funny, considering I was the one who drove it to work every day. I called him. He answered on the second ring. "Hey," he said casually, like we were discussing groceries instead of dismantling a marriage. "Why are you fighting me over the car?" I asked. He sighed loudly. "Erin, you're making this harder than it needs to be." "I'm asking for basic fairness." "You're asking for everything," he said. "You're the one who filed." There it was again. The narrative shift. "You cheated," I said quietly. Silence. Then a small laugh. "We were already drifting," he replied. "Let's not rewrite history." I felt something inside me go very still. Not angry. Not loud.
Just done.
I'm not rewriting anything, I said. I'm just finally reading it correctly. He didn't respond. He just hung up. 7 seconds of dial tone. And just like that, the marriage that had taken 6 years to build ended with the emotional weight of a dropped call. 2 weeks in, the exhaustion hit like a truck. I fell asleep at my desk during a lunch break and woke up to a patient gently saying, "Sweetheart, are you okay?" I smiled automatically.
Hai fine, Ilid.
That night, I burned a pot of pasta because I forgot I'd turned the stove on. Small things started slipping. Passwords. Appointments. Once I drove home and didn't remember the last 10 minutes of the drive. That scared me more than the divorce. Because exhaustion doesn't announce itself dramatically. It just erodes you quietly. Meanwhile, my mother was busy curating her version of events. I found out through my cousin, Jenna, who texted me out of the blue. "Aunt Carol says you're being dramatic about the divorce and refusing family support. Is that true?" I stared at the message for a long time. Refusing support. The irony was almost impressive. I typed, deleted, retyped, and finally sent. Asked for help. I was told I chose this. 3 dots appeared. Disappeared. Then came the reply. Oh. Just that. Oh. Not outrage. Not apology. Just the sound of someone realizing they'd been fed a different script. That was the moment I understood something clearly. My mother wasn't just refusing to help. She was managing the narrative. In her version, she was the strong parent with a difficult daughter who made impulsive choices and rejected guidance.
Clean.
Sympathetic. Socially safe. And completely untrue. The court hearing landed on a rainy Monday morning. Gray skies. Cold air. The courthouse smelled faintly of old paper and burnt coffee. Kyle showed up in a pressed button-down like he was attending a networking event.
He smiled when he saw me.
Actually smiled. "You look tired," he said. I didn't respond. Inside the courtroom, everything was procedural.
Dates.
Documents.
Statements. No dramatic speeches. No cinematic closure.
Just a judge flipping through paperwork while my life was summarized in legal bullet points. When the hearing ended, my lawyer leaned toward me and said quietly, "You held your ground well." I nodded. Then I walked outside and sat on a wet bench and cried for exactly 4 minutes. Not loud. Not messy. Just controlled. Because I still had a shift at 3 p.m. And life doesn't pause for emotional processing when you're billing by the hour. By month 3, I had paid half the legal fees. By month 5, I had picked up freelance billing work for 2 additional clinics. By month 8, the divorce was finalized.
No alimony.
Minimal asset division. Full emotional cost. I went home that day, microwaved leftover soup, and sat at my tiny kitchen table staring at the final decree.
Free.
Legally. Emotionally? Not even close. At 10:07 p.m., my phone buzzed. Unknown number. I answered before thinking. "Hello." A familiar voice said, "I heard it's official." My mother. "Of course. I'm surprised you called," I said. "Well," she replied, voice calm, measured, "I didn't want you to feel abandoned." The word hit me so hard I almost laughed. "You mean like when I asked for help?" I asked. A pause. Then gently, almost condescendingly, "You needed to learn how to stand on your own, Erin. And look, you did." I closed my eyes. "So, this was a lesson?" I asked. "Growth," she corrected. Behind her, I could hear the faint sound of a television and my brother's voice laughing in the background. Life in that house had continued uninterrupted. "I'm glad it worked out," she added. "Now you're stronger." Stronger. Like pain was a training program she'd enrolled me in without consent. "I didn't become strong because of you," I said quietly. Silence stretched across the line. Then she said something I would remember for the next 11 years. "Either way," she replied, "you turned out fine without my help."
Fine.
Like survival was a cosmetic outcome. Like the sleepless nights, the financial panic, the quiet breakdowns at my kitchen sink were just minor details in her larger philosophy of independence. I have to go, I said. All right, she replied lightly. Try not to make future choices so emotionally, okay? The line clicked. And that was it.
No apology. No accountability.
Just a neat little narrative where my suffering had been rebranded as personal development. That night, I didn't cry. I didn't call anyone. I just opened my laptop and started applying for higher-paying administrative positions in healthcare systems 2 counties over. If my mother wanted a daughter who could handle things, then fine. I would handle them. Just not for her approval anymore. 3 weeks later, I got an interview for a medical operations coordinator role at a small outpatient network. The hiring manager asked one question that stuck with me. What made you leave your last chapter behind? I thought about Kyle, about the folder on the kitchen island, about the check sliding toward my brother instead of me. And I said very calmly, I realized staying would cost me more than leaving ever could. He nodded once. I got the job 2 days later. Salary, nearly double what I was making. Benefits, stability, and, for the first time in nearly a year, a sense that my life wasn't constantly on the verge of financial collapse. I moved into a modest 1-bedroom apartment across town. Nothing fancy.
No granite counters.
No shared memories. Just quiet. And control. I didn't know it then, but that quiet apartment would become the foundation of a life my mother would eventually pretend she always believed I was capable of. And the irony? She would start telling people my independence was something she taught me, not something I built alone while she watched from a safe distance. But that part of the story didn't begin until years later. Right around the time she started planning an event where she'd proudly describe herself as a mother who always showed up for her children. An event I was never meant to attend. And a microphone she never expected anyone else to hold. Independence doesn't arrive all at once. It shows up in quiet upgrades. A paycheck that covers rent without panic. A full night of sleep without checking your bank app at 2 a.m. Groceries bought without calculating which bill you'll delay to afford them. My new job started on a Monday in early September. The office sat inside a low-brick medical complex just off Highway 69, with fluorescent lights, neutral walls, and the faint smell of sanitizer that never really leaves your clothes. Not glamorous, not impressive, but stable. And after a year of emotional and financial freefall, stability felt like luxury. My role was operations coordination, insurance workflows, patient scheduling systems, internal reporting. Quiet work. Detailed work. The kind that rewards consistency more than charisma. Which suited me just fine. For the first time in years, my life wasn't centered around reacting to chaos. It was built on systems, schedules, predictability. And that predictability gave me something my marriage and my childhood never did. Mental space. The first time my mother called after I started the new job was exactly 3 months later.
Sunday.
6:02 p.m. I almost didn't answer. Her contact name was still saved as Do Not Ask Again. My thumb hovered for 4 seconds. Then I picked up. Hello. Her voice was warm. Too warm. I heard you got a new position, she said. Operations coordinator, right? I blinked. How did you hear that? Oh, Erin, she replied lightly, people talk. Translation. Extended family. Neighborhood grapevine. Carefully maintained social image network. I'm glad you're doing well, she continued.
See?
I told you that hardship builds character. There it was again. The rebranding. My struggle. Rewritten as her wisdom. I didn't call to discuss character development, I said calmly. A pause. Then a soft laugh, like I'd made a mildly amusing joke. Well, I just wanted to check in, she said. Make sure you're stable now. Stable. Not happy. Not healing. Stable. I am, I replied. That's good, she said. Your brother is doing wonderfully, by the way. Promotion at the dealership. I always knew he'd thrive with the right support. The word support hung in the air between us like a quiet accusation. I didn't respond. She filled the silence herself. You always were the strong one, she added. You didn't need the same kind of help. And in that moment, something inside me shifted. Not painfully. Not dramatically. Just clearly. For the first time, I understood that my mother wasn't confused about what she'd done. She was consistent. Intentional.
Comfortable with it.
I have dinner in the oven, I said. Oh, of course, she replied. Take care of yourself, Erin. She hung up before I could say goodbye. That would become her pattern over the years. Short calls. Polite tone.
No accountability.
Just enough contact to maintain the public illusion of a connected relationship.
5 years passed that way.
Quietly. Productively. I was promoted twice. Moved into a senior administrative role. Started managing workflow systems across 3 clinics instead of 1. I learned budgeting, negotiation, policy compliance. The kind of skills nobody claps for, but everybody depends on. I didn't date seriously. Not out of bitterness. Out of caution. Healing from a manipulative marriage isn't about swearing off love. It's about retraining your instincts to recognize respect instead of charm. My closest relationship during those years wasn't romantic. It was professional. His name was Daniel Reyes, Chief Financial Officer for the Outpatient Network. Early 40s. Measured voice. The kind of man who read contracts fully and spoke only after thinking. We first interacted over a scheduling audit. I'd flagged a billing inefficiency that was costing the network nearly 6 figures annually. He called me into his office and said one sentence I'd never heard from an authority figure before. You didn't complain about the problem, he said. You built a solution. I blinked. I just did my job. He shook his head slightly.
No, he said.
You did more than that. It was the first time in years that someone in a leadership position acknowledged my competence without attaching a personality critique to it. Not you're strong. Not you're resilient. Just capable. Over time, our professional interactions became frequent. Budget meetings, operational reviews, strategy planning sessions. Strictly professional, always respectful, and consistently grounded in facts, not narratives. Which is why, years later, when his name appeared on an event invitation connected to my family, my stomach dropped before my brain even caught up. The invitation arrived on a Thursday afternoon. Cream envelope. Embossed lettering. My mother's full name printed elegantly in the corner. Carol Whitmore, 60th birthday and community appreciation gala.
Gala.
Of course. My mother loved structured admiration events. Inside was a thick card detailing the venue, dress code, and a formal dinner program honoring her decades of dedication as a single mother and pillar of the community. I read that line 3 times. Single mother. Pillar. Dedication. It was a carefully curated narrative. One that erased nuance. And history. And inconvenient daughters. Tucked behind the main card was a smaller slip of paper.
Plain.
Unembossed. Handwritten. I hope you come.
Mom. No apology. No reflection.
Just an invitation framed as reconciliation without responsibility. I set it on the counter and walked away. For 2 days, I ignored it. Then Sunday night, my phone buzzed. My brother. First time in nearly a year. Hey, Ben said casually. You got Mom's invite? I did. You should come, he added. It would mean a lot to her. I leaned against my kitchen counter. Did it mean a lot to her when I asked for help during my divorce? I asked. Silence. Then the familiar deflection. That was a long time ago, Erin.
Time.
The universal eraser people use when they don't want to confront past decisions. She talks about you more now, he continued. Tells people how proud she is of how independent you became. I let out a quiet breath.
Of course she did.
My survival had become part of her legacy branding. I'll think about it, I said. That's all I'm asking, he replied quickly, relieved. Before hanging up, he added, Oh, and one of the keynote speakers is some finance executive from a healthcare network.
Daniel something.
Mom's foundation partnered with their organization this year. My grip tightened on the phone. Daniel Reyes? I asked. Yeah, that's the name, he said. You know him. I work with him. I replied slowly. A pause.
Huh, Ben said.
Small world. Not small. Precise. and suddenly very complicated. I brought the invitation to work the next day and placed it face down on my desk. Daniel stopped by around noon for a routine budget review. His eyes flicked briefly to the envelope. "Formal event?" he asked. "My mother's birthday gala," I said. He nodded politely. "She's involved in community fundraising, correct?" "Yes," I replied. He glanced at the date. "That's the same event I'm speaking at," he said casually. My chest went still. "Of course it was." "I didn't realize she was your mother," he added. I met his eyes for the first time since the conversation started. "She is," I said. He didn't ask questions.
Didn't pry.
Just nodded once and moved on to the budget report like a professional, which made the situation feel even heavier, because he had no idea about the divorce, the kitchen island,
The check.
the phrase, "You chose this." He only knew me as a reliable operations leader who delivered accurate reports and fixed broken systems. And for the first time in 11 years, two separate versions of my life were about to exist in the same room. My mother's narrative and my reality. I called my therapist that evening. Yes, I had started therapy 3 years earlier, quietly, consistently, and without announcing it to anyone who would turn it into commentary. Dr. Levin listened as I explained the invitation, the gala, the speech, the overlapping professional connection. Then she asked the question she always asked when I faced something tied to my past. "Why would you go?" she said gently. I stared at the invitation on my table. "For closure," I replied. She was quiet for a moment. "Or," she said carefully, "because a part of you still wants her to acknowledge what happened." That landed harder than I expected. Because it was true. Not loudly true, but quietly, stubbornly true. "I don't expect an apology," I said. "Expectation and hope are different," she replied. Silence filled the room. Then she added, "If you attend, go as the person you are now. Not the daughter," she rewrote. I RSVP'd the next morning. One guest. Myself. No drama.
No announcement.
Just a quiet confirmation that I would be present in a room built on a story that excluded the hardest chapter of my life. 2 weeks later, the official program schedule was emailed to attendees. 6 p.m., welcome reception. 7 p.m., dinner service. 8 p.m., tribute speech, Carol Whitmore. 8:20 p.m., keynote address, Daniel Reyes, CFO, Horizon Medical Network. I read the timeline twice. Then a third time, because something about that sequence felt inevitable. My mother would speak first. She would frame her story, her sacrifices, her parenting, her legacy. And then a man who respected facts more than narratives would step up to the same microphone. A man who knew me only through my work ethic, not my family history, not my divorce, not the night I asked for help and was told, "You chose this." For 11 years, my mother had controlled the story of who I was. At family gatherings, in phone calls, in carefully worded conversations with relatives and neighbors. But in 3 weeks, we would be in the same room. Same event, same audience, same timeline, different truth. And for the first time since that kitchen conversation, I had a feeling the narrative she built was about to meet something it couldn't manage. Not anger. Not confrontation. Just reality. The gala was held at a downtown ballroom overlooking the river. Glass walls. Soft lighting. Round tables dressed in ivory linen and carefully folded napkins that looked more expensive than my first apartment rent. It looked exactly like the kind of event my mother would thrive in.
Polished.
Curated. Controlled. I arrived at 6:12 p.m. Simple navy dress. Low heels. Minimal jewelry. Nothing that invited attention. Nothing that could be labeled dramatic. Just presence. The reception hall buzzed with polite laughter and the low clink of champagne glasses. I recognized a few distant relatives near the entrance, their eyes widening slightly when they saw me. Not hostile. Not warm. Just surprised. Like I was a character who had unexpectedly returned in the second season of a show they thought had moved on without me. Then I saw her. My mother stood near the center of the room in a silver dress, posture straight, smile calibrated to exactly the right level of graciousness. She was shaking hands, touching arms, leaning in slightly when people spoke to her. Performing. She spotted me after 7 seconds. I counted. Her smile didn't drop. It paused. Then reset. She walked toward me with controlled elegance and stopped just close enough to appear affectionate without actually touching me. Erin, she said softly, like my name was something delicate.
Mom.
I'm so glad you came, she continued, voice warm enough for nearby guests to hear. Public warmth. Private distance. I received your note, I said. Her eyes flickered for half a second. I thought it was time to reconnect, she replied smoothly. Families grow. They evolve.
No apology. No acknowledgement.
Just a rebrand. Before I could respond, a woman beside her said, Carol talks about you all the time. She always says how proud she is of how independent you turned out. There it was. The narrative.
Clean.
Inspiring. Convenient. My mother placed a gentle hand on the woman's arm. She went through a difficult period, she said, voice lowered in a sympathetic tone. But I always believed she'd become strong. I felt the words settle into my chest like something heavy and familiar. Not because they were cruel, because they were incomplete. And incomplete truths, repeated long enough, start sounding like facts. Dinner began at 7. I was seated at a side table near the back of the room. Not hidden, but not central. Strategic placement. Close enough to acknowledge. Far enough to control. Across the room, I saw Daniel reviewing his notes at the speaker's table. He glanced up once, saw me, and gave a brief professional nod. Nothing more. Nothing less. Exactly the kind of interaction built on years of mutual respect and zero personal theatrics. At 8:03 p.m., the lights dimmed slightly. A host stepped onto the stage. Tonight, he announced, we celebrate a woman whose dedication as a single mother and community leader has shaped countless lives. Applause filled the room. My mother rose gracefully and walked to the podium, confident, prepared, comfortable in front of an audience that already believed her story. She smiled, adjusted the microphone, and began. When you raise children alone, she said, voice steady and emotional in all the right places, you make sacrifices people never see. Soft murmurs of agreement echoed around the tables. She spoke about long nights, about resilience, about teaching her children independence and accountability. My fingers tightened slightly around my water glass. Then she said it. The same phrase, just dressed differently for a formal audience. I always believed in letting my children face the consequences of their choices, she continued. Because that's how strength is built. Polite applause followed. And then, as if guided by instinct, her eyes drifted toward my table. A pause. Brief. Deliberate. And I am proud, she added, voice softer now, of the woman my daughter became after overcoming a very difficult divorce. She learned to stand on her own. And as a mother, that's all you can hope for. The room turned slightly. Not dramatically. Just enough to register that I had been referenced. My mother smiled, satisfied, and concluded her speech to warm applause. She stepped off the stage glowing, validated, affirmed, untouched by contradiction, for about 4 minutes. Because at 8:21 p.m., the host returned to the microphone. And now, he said, our keynote speaker, Chief Financial Officer of Horizon Medical Network, Mr. Daniel Reyes. Daniel walked to the stage with calm precision.
No theatrics. No exaggerated gestures.
Just quiet authority. He began with a speech about healthcare systems, operational resilience, and organizational accountability. Professional. Measured. Fact-driven. Then, midway through his address, he paused and glanced at his notes. I'd like to share a brief observation, he said. His eyes scanned the room once, then landed on my table. I've had the privilege of working with an operations leader in our network for several years, he continued. Someone who quietly rebuilt her life after significant personal hardship, without public support, and without asking for recognition. My stomach dropped. Not fear. Recognition. He wasn't guessing. He was stating. He continued, voice steady. She never framed her struggle as a lesson taught to her, he said. She described it as a situation she had to survive alone while managing legal, financial, and professional pressures simultaneously. The room grew quieter, not silent, but attentive. Then he said the sentence that changed everything. In fact, he added calmly, when she faced the financial burden of her divorce years ago, she requested family support and was explicitly told, "You chose this." The air shifted. Audibly. Chairs stilled. Glasses paused midair. My mother's posture froze at her table. Daniel didn't raise his voice. Didn't dramatize. He simply continued. "I know this," he said, because she once explained why she never asks for personal favors in professional settings. Her exact words were, "I learned early that survival without support is quieter than people think."
Total silence now.
Not hostile. Not chaotic. Just heavy. He looked directly toward my mother's table, then back at the audience. "And yet," he finished, "she is one of the most competent, ethical, and self-reliant professionals I have ever worked with. Not because someone taught her independence, but because she had no other option." A fork hit a plate somewhere behind me. Sharp.
Loud.
Unavoidable. He concluded his speech normally after that.
No accusations. No spectacle.
Just facts placed carefully in the same room as a curated narrative. Applause followed. Slower at first. Then steady. When the lights brightened, the room felt different. Not hostile toward my mother, but recalibrated. People process contradictions quietly in formal settings. Through glances. Through silence. Through the absence of easy agreement. My mother approached me 10 minutes later.
No audience now.
No performance smile. Just a tight expression and controlled breathing. "You discussed private matters with him?" she asked in a low voice. I met her gaze calmly. "I never asked him to say anything tonight." Her jaw tightened. "You made me look dishonest." The words landed without heat. Just exposure. "I didn't make you say anything on that stage," I replied. She blinked once. Then again. As if recalculating. "I supported you in my own way," she said finally. There it was. The final defense. "I asked for help," I said quietly. "You said, you chose this." Silence stretched between us. Not dramatic. Not explosive. Just undeniable. Guests continued talking softly around us. Music resumed. Life moved forward. But the narrative she'd maintained for 11 years no longer stood unchallenged in the one room where she had tried to cement it permanently. "You turned out fine," she said after a long pause, softer now. I exhaled slowly. "I turned out stable," I corrected. "There's a difference."
She didn't respond.
Didn't argue. Didn't apologize. For the first time in my life, my mother had nothing rehearsed left to say. And that silence was louder than any confrontation could have been. I picked at my clutch. "I'm not angry," I told her calmly. "But I'm also not rewriting the past to make it more comfortable for you." Her eyes flickered. Hurt. Not because of cruelty. Because of clarity. "I did what I thought was right," she whispered. "I believe you," I said.
And I meant it.
That was the most complicated truth of all. She hadn't seen herself as unkind. She had seen herself as practical.
Strategic. Strong.
And in doing so, she had mistaken emotional absence for discipline. "I hope you're well, Mom," I added gently. Then I walked toward the exit. No dramatic scene. No raised voices. No shattered glasses or public breakdowns. Just a quiet departure from a story that no longer belonged to her. The aftermath was quieter than anyone would expect. No viral posts. No family explosion. Just subtle shifts. Relatives who spoke to me differently. Conversations that no longer framed my divorce as a phase. And, most noticeably, my mother stopped telling the independent story the same way. Months later, my brother called. "She talks about you less," he admitted. Not negatively. Just carefully.
Carefully.
like someone aware that the audience now knew there were missing chapters. My professional life continued steadily. Promotions, expanded responsibilities, long nights filled with structured work instead of emotional survival. And personally, I sleep through the night now. That's the part people underestimate. Not success, not recognition, just peace. I don't flinch when my phone rings. I don't rehearse conversations in my head before making simple decisions. And I don't ask people for emotional support who have already shown me their philosophy on hardship. My mother and I speak occasionally. Short calls, neutral topics, weather,
Health.
logistics. No rewritten history. No forced reconciliation arc. Just distance with honesty, which, strangely, is more stable than the illusion of closeness we had before. People sometimes ask me if I feel vindicated. I don't. Vindication suggests I needed her to be proven wrong.
I didn't.
I just needed the truth to exist in the same room as the story. And that night, for the first time in 11 years, it did. Not loudly. Not cruelly. Just clearly. If you've ever been told your struggle was your choice while asking for help, I see you. Sometimes the deepest betrayal isn't abandonment. It's the quiet reframing of your pain as a lesson someone else takes credit for. My mother once told me, "You chose this." And in a way, she was right. I chose to leave a marriage that was eroding me. I chose to rebuild without a safety net. I chose stability over approval. And 11 years later, I chose something even harder. I chose not to argue with the narrative. I simply lived a life that made it incomplete.
I'm Erin Callahan. I'm 41.
I rebuilt my life after divorce without family support, and I no longer confuse survival with being fine. And honestly, that clarity is worth more than any help I asked for back then. If this story felt familiar in any way, you're not alone. And sometimes the strongest response to "you chose this" is quietly choosing yourself.